TVI sends the first British film crew into Iran since the war with Iraq began. The reporter, Julian Manyon.
In his secret headquarters, somewhere in South Iran, the commander-in-chief of the country's armed forces prays to God. He's a simple man, almost a recluse, a man with absolutely no military experience. Yet in the course of the war, President Banisadr has been transformed from ineffectual politician into national hero, and today he poses a real threat to the power of the mullahs. 2 years after the revolution, in the middle of a desperate war for survival with Iraq, Iran's leadership is still in turmoil. Ayatollah Khomeini is the only voice with real authority. In his shadow, the country's religious and political leaders are still at each other's throats. And today, in front of his home in Tehran, Khomeini is obliged to call once again for national unity. But the fact that Iran's enemies have had to come to terms with is that Khomeini and his revolution still have the power to move men and even to change history. Responding to the Ayatollah's call, thousands of young Iranians have taken up arms against the Iraqis. The fact that Khomeini's revolution still exists is largely due to the Revolutionary Guards, or Pasdaran. It was they who provided the first line of defense when the Iraqis launched their invasion 16 weeks ago. With the regular army chaotic and demoralized, the Iranians had to rely on this lightly armed but fanatical militia to hold off the Iraqi Soviet tanks. She's up. Midnight in a command tent near the Desvol front line. President Banisadr gets a briefing from the sector commander, a regular officer in command of regular troops. Banisadr and his staff were preparing the ground for the counter-offensive, which they launched this week.
What you must understand is that in the first few days of the attack on Iran, the Iraqis thought they would meet no great opposition and that the war would be over in 3 or 4 days, or at the very most a week. Here in Iran as well, the authorities were of the same opinion. But things were not to turn out like that. We knew then we could not depend on Iran being resupplied with military equipment neither by the Americans, nor the Europeans, nor by anybody else. All we could hope to do was to fall back on the fighting men themselves, to reshape and reorganize them, and in doing so affect the outcome of the war.
Banisadr is winning devotion, even reverence, among the regular soldiers at the front line. To many a military historian, the idea of Banisadr as commander-in-chief would seem bizarre, even ludicrous. On most fronts, it's now the regular army that's doing the bulk of the fighting. American-built heavy artillery defending the Islamic Revolution. Iranian mortar and artillery crews have established fire superiority in many areas of the front. It's their training and equipment that may well prove decisive. But many now believe that the revolution's worst enemy is not the United States, but the split in its own ranks. President Banisadr is now the victim of a savage behind-the-scenes attack by the mullahs. They accuse him of trying to build a power base in the army. Banisadr himself remains in the south, surrounded by loyal officers in what some are now describing as a government in exile. The survival of Iran's revolutionary government has impressed the world. How will it now cope with its own victory on the battlefield?
Kocaman oda.